Welcome to another episode of the Tour on Air podcast. And today I'm joined by Carlos Pereira. I hope I'm pronouncing
That was
this.
incredible pronunciation for a first try.
Pereira from BITKRAFT Ventures. Welcome on the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And Carlos is joining us from a heated New York, where humidity is rising.
It's hot in here.
Alongside inflation.
Both rise equally fast.
And you have an interesting twist on the sort of venture model. And before we get into that, maybe just briefly on your journey to starting or joining principal as a principal BITKRAFT Ventures. Tell us a little bit about your professional background.
Sure. I graduated in political philosophy at the University of Virginia, and somehow found myself in finance straight out of that. I started my career on the buy side at a company called Eldridge, at the time Eldridge Industries. Eldridge is a privately held investment holding company that is controlled by a small group of partners, one of whom is Todd Boehly, the owner of the LA Dodgers, or one of the owners of the LA Dodgers, recently bought Chelsea and the Lakers, has a number of attractive media assets and also insurance operation. And so it was a really diversified job investing across asset classes and sort of, across the risk spectrum. So anywhere between stress debt to investment grade debt to private equity to venture capital. So it was a super broad experience at the start of my career. And then in 2018, the theme of esports was beginning to pick more and more steam. I've been a lifelong gamer and pitched my hat in the ring to help with Eldridge's curiosity around the space. Ended up playing a role as part of our scaling from one asset to 10 assets and really, leading that effort as my big passion as a gamer who was finally allowed to do investments in the space. And then spent a year at a portfolio company that was in both my portfolio and BITKRAFT's portfolio. We were on the board and they needed some help, so I went to help them. And coming out of that, really decided that for as much as it was amazing doing a million different things early on in my career, that the one thing that I kept coming back to and getting the most excited when I was getting time to do was really the gaming thing. And throughout my time investing in gaming, I had always looked at the BITKRAFT guys as the A team, who I would call and ask for advice or sort of see them on the deals that no one else could get into, kind of thing. And they decided to give me a shot at the team. So it was a 3-year long interview process in a way that all came to a head pretty quickly. And I started here May of last year.
And BITKRAFT, I mean, if I read the description of your website, built by founders for founders, BITKRAFT is a global investment platform for gaming, Web3 and immersive technology. So this tells me like two things. One, there's more to it than just handing out capital when you say it's an investment platform. And two, Web3 is part of it, but you date back for I think 1997 at least says on the website. So you're not only investing into crypto gaming, correct?
Yeah, in terms of the platform, we've been fortunate to see this phase of gaming is eating the world. To borrow a phrase from someone else, right? Where a lot of things have increasingly become gamified. The gaming TAM keeps expanding, and being a gaming investor has gone from being either just an early stage activity and then sort of like a very late stage activity to the extent that some of these things raise growth rounds, to being a cross stage investment. Where you can support companies for 10 years of a private journey until they're ultimately sold or IPO or whatever it may be. And also the types of companies that are touching that gaming segment keep getting broader. And so through that, we've been able to grow and evolve with gaming to go from being initially focused on earlier stage, primarily esports centric investments, to now focus at the intersection of the digital world and the physical world, with this belief that people increasingly feel more comfortable in the digital world and take the digital world more seriously as they do the physical world. And being able to invest in that both across stages and across the different types of sub-segments that touch making that thesis of synthetic reality a reality, a truth. And then in terms of the crypto balance in the portfolio, so today about 1/3 of our capital sits in crypto or sits allocated to crypto, and 2/3 of it is in traditional equity vehicles that range from Series Seed, a lot of Series A, and then all the way up to growth stage investment vehicles. And so for us, our approach into crypto has been derivative of a lifelong as gamers, whether it's people like Jens, one of our co-founders who started ESL back in the day and has been in the esports scene since the beginning as one of the people making it. But really anyone in the firm that you talk to will spend significant amount of times a week playing video games. When my favorite video game came out earlier this year, I sent a message on the teams and I was like, you guys are not going to hear from me for 3 days. And that was all good. And so we come from a lifelong.
What was the game?
Oh, Elden Ring. Yeah. So, we come from a lifelong passion for this, and really saw crypto as a way of solving pain points that we feel as gamers, of taking the gaming industry further, of expanding the TAM, and really as one more important part of the bridge between physical world and the synthetic reality thesis. And so we raised and deployed, we raised our first crypto fund last year, which was Token Fund 1. It was a $75 million vehicle, and deployed that over the next, over a year. And, today we're still making, we continue to make crypto investments out of, a different vehicle.
And when you say, we've seen obviously the entire tech landscape, as you were mentioning, becoming more and more gamified. How do you define gaming then? Like within your thesis, like what type of, technologies or applications, fall under your roof? And maybe it's a blurry line, but where can one actually make that distinction once a world is so gamified and becoming so gamified?
Sure. I think one way that we try to make the distinction is we have 4 major investment buckets in our strategy. Content and IP, and those would be gaming studios, right? So what you think of when I say I invest in gaming. Then we have platforms, which is admittedly a broad category, and a lot of things fit into platforms. Of course, these have to be platforms that are attached to a derivative of the gaming ecosystem as we see it. We have horizontal technologies, which to us are technologies that either come from gaming and have application elsewhere or vice versa. And then we have the 4th category of applied game mechanics. And the categories 1 of content and IP and category 4 of applied game mechanics are I think, where some of the distinction or the answer to your question lies. For us, there is such a thing as making a game, and you look at it and it's very clear that a person is making a game. But you look at something like Duolingo, for example, where it's not a game; it's a software, it's an app for people to learn a new language. But if you go through that user experience, it's about ranking and matches and points, and it's a highly gamified experience, with that gamification layer being an important part of user engagement and all the excitement that exists around the product. And so, I think that there certainly comes a point on the curve of gamification where there's not enough gamification there, where it becomes too superficial for it to be true to our thesis or to our core investment focus as a fund, right? Like, what do our LPs trust us to deploy? What's the job that we promise to do? And I think there comes a point where gamification is too diluted to fall under that thesis. But I think that anything that is significantly leaning into the mechanics of game design to do a user experience that feels like that, the challenge, the fun, the pursuit of some meta goal that is beyond just the simple goal that you're trying to to accomplish, right? Another great example was is Superhuman, which is an awesome email company, email efficiency company, and they were developing a game, or they were working on a game for a very long time, and they approached that process very much that way of like, can you reach inbox zero and all that stuff. And I think that as long as when the user goes through the experience, they feel like they're playing a game to accomplish something else, but there is a game-like feeling there, I think that's fair game for us.
So it doesn't have to be necessarily entertainment value, or or that's maybe an ingredient of it, but not necessarily the primary.
It can be used to accomplish something beyond self-indulgent entertainment. Yes.
And in terms of, TAM, you were mentioning, the total addressable market here. I mean, a lot of our listeners may know this, but for those who don't, can you shine a light on how big the gaming market actually is, also when compared to, books, music, film, for example, and still growing at a healthy rate as well?
Absolutely. I'm going to keep it a little bit high level to not quote growth percentages off the top of my head on the spot. But let's talk about big numbers, right? So a lot of people talk about gaming being something between a 130 and 160 billion dollar TAM, which onto itself is larger than music and film, and it's the broadest category of entertainment. Now, the part that we took a look last year, we had an intuition that if you looked at the composition of that 160 billion, that number was understated because it didn't include a lot of activities that happen around gaming and are totally connected to gaming, but perhaps are getting allocated elsewhere when in fact they're derivative of gaming IP, derivative of the gaming experience and players and all of that. And so we did our own work with our partners at Navic. We published it last year. In our assessment, the gaming market is actually over $300 billion. It's about double of the figure that's commonly quoted, right? And so if the, call it the original figure of 130, 160 is already larger than the other entertainment categories, in our view, with this 2x uplift from taking a more thorough look at what flows into the gaming ecosystem, it's by far the largest entertainment category. Now, what's interesting with it, as you mentioned on the growth rates, are two things. One is that it still grows extremely, it still grows fast relative to other forms of media. I don't want to put a percentage here.
I think it's roughly roughly 8 to 10%, but that's maybe an old number. Yeah,
exactly right. Like I kind of like there was a little bit of a COVID boost there in the last, maybe some of the last figures that were quoted. So I just want to be cautious with the number. But the other thing that's interesting about that growth is that it tends to be a remarkably resilient category. There was a phenomenon on the sort of aftermath of the Great Depression, where movie theaters performed extremely well. And it was because a lot of people no longer had a lot of discretionary income to do more expensive things, and they still wanted to purchase some form of basic entertainment. And that provided that basic entertainment where people were now going more to the movies because they couldn't do other things. And I think that gaming not only has that of an extremely cheap cost per hour when you engage meaningfully in a game, right? So you think about a Call of Duty game or any of these, I play a lot of Call of Duty, right? Or something like Elden Ring. I put in about 80 hours, which is relatively fast. A lot of my friends, are 150, 160 hours deep, and that's a $60 piece of content. So if you do hours of entertainment over price paid, it really outperforms everything. And what's interesting is you also build a strong social graph around that. So not only does it remain very cheap, or is it a very cheap form of entertainment, but you have bonds, right? Like when I don't log in, I usually have friends messaging me, "Hey, are you playing today? Are you playing today?" And some days I was not planning on playing, and I'm like, "Okay, whatever, let's play." And so that social loop or the social component that gets embedded into your usage loop of the product also makes it extra resilient. And so it's big, it grows relatively fast for the forms of entertainment, and it's resilient. So it's a market that we think is quite special.
I mean, you mentioned this is something I wanted to discuss later in our conversation, but now that you mentioned kind of the Great Depression and its impact on the film industry and the cinema industry, how much do you feel like, gaming is an escape for people? And, also with kind of the rising income inequality that we see, like, how do you see that dystopian, fiction that we've been reading so much about, where eventually only a few people will actually travel to that national park in Alaska, while the rest of us will enjoy it via VR only.
Mm-hmm. For someone who went to school for philosophy, I feel ashamed for having forgotten the philosopher. But the age-old experiment of what if you could plug a human into a machine and it's virtually indistinguishable from their life, and you can give them everything they want, like, is that still a life worth living, right? And I ask myself that question often, because I do think that if you're betting on the frontier of gaming, whether it's something like AR, VR, XR, betting on robust digital economies that have real world value and digital assets and all that stuff, in many ways you're betting towards that Ready Player One world. And every time I think about the Ready Player One world, about all the amazing things people were doing on screen, I also remember all the times that they were not in the game and they were actually just running around on slums, on fairly precarious situations, right? And the truth is, I think that's a real risk. I don't think that gaming causes that risk, but I think that as gaming becomes better and better, it provides a higher quality escape from income inequality or from environmental degradation, from increasingly dense urban environments, like all that stuff, right? Like, I think that there's a certain level of unfortunately, development and economy and all of that causes societies to evolve in a certain way. And I think that, gaming will continue to be an escape for those people. But I'm not of the belief, for example, that absent games, they would all of a sudden go and do, something else that is substantially sort of, more connected to real life, right? I think in the end of the day, a handful of years ago, I think Netflix in an earnings call said, we're not worried about HBO, we're worried about Fortnite. And I think they were right to worry about Fortnite. I think they were wrong to not worry about HBO. But if you look at what's in that statement, right, is in the end of the day, you're competing for hours on screen for attention of your consumer. And I think that the person who is not playing a game is likely going to be doing something else in the house, in that digital space. Although, of course, as you look at young kids, and I remember, really wanting to play games instead of going out and play soccer with my friends or something like that in Brazil, right? So for sure, there exists a level of that. But I think primarily you're competing after the sort of decision to experience the world digitally has already been made.
Although, yeah, probably it's increasing though, right? Like the consumption is increasing, and it's interesting that a lot of the people that are building, these platforms or, these tools, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, all these folks, are very strict when it comes to consumption of these tools, right, for their kids. And, and yeah, I wonder, do you think, like, is there like any no-go zone when it comes to, putting in place addictive, functionality into the game? Like, do you think there should be almost like an ethical code for game developers, or is it all fair play and, whatever you create, you create?
I don't think that there's any developer in the world that would be proud if you went to them and you said, like the rare case where someone has a seizure because they looked at the screen too long, right? Like no one is proud of that. I think that people put amazing content out there, and some people get dispositions, whether it's substances, habits, a number of things. Some people get hooked onto them, and sort of go beyond what's healthy. I think that if you're introducing some highly addictive mechanic, sort of that, like, as a gamer, as someone who approaches content creation from the perspective of like, what would I like to play, or at least like what I think is a beautiful gaming experience. I'm personally not interested in games that are like terribly addictive, but sort of, I don't know, there's no I'd like, it's like a pure slots machine with like effectively no reward, right? Or something like that. Although surely slot machines are fine in a casino setting and all that stuff, right? So I look at that and I'm like, that's not the future I want to build, right? And so I hesitate to say that there's a complete moral line that I can draw, because as I look around society in the physical world, not just in the digital world, it seems like we allow user experience to be treated that way, and for people to capture those emotional triggers sort of throughout. And to the extent that there is a line to be drawn, it's hard for me to do it as an individual, right? It's like something significantly more collective. Now, what I'll say is, I don't think that, like, when I imagine the complex digital economies and future worlds where people are spending a lot of time in that ecosystem, I get worried about the physical consequences of us being unhealthy, the same way, that anyone who works 12 plus, 14 plus hour jobs or hour a day jobs in a chair is exposing themselves to harmful, habits with on screen. So I worry about the physical implication of that. But I actually think that the mental side of human development can be quite healthy in those environments, because you can have, for example, if I have a world in which I am deeply attached to that community, to that group, to that ecosystem, I care about my reputation. I care about the things I do. It doesn't matter if in this form I'm a male, and there I'm a female superhero, whatever it is. And as a matter of fact, that freedom element of allowing people to take on their own identities as they immerse themselves into a different experience, and then be themselves and build a reputation around some other identity that perhaps they're even more aligned with. And through that, practice compassion, practice dedication, practice social bonding, practice a bunch of things. And I think that you can have a very meaningful experience online. You can have real friends. And I think that the more these experiences get deep, the more that you can count on the human societal development to also happen on gaming. It's just the physical side of, like, how do we as humans, who are not meant to experience the world in this way, evolve as a species, is sort of on a health level, right? That like, that's where my concern lies more than anything.
So the metaverse, whatever that is, now one defines it, but it allows humans to experiment and share values and experiences that may not be possible physically. I mean, if you're stuck in a village in some country, right? Like, your scope of experiences, of course, physically is much more limited than what you can experience online.
Yeah.
What do you see, like, in terms of trends in the space? I mean, the kind of play to earn was big thing in the crypto community, of course, with Axie Infinity and a few others kind of leading the way there, and that I really don't know much about it in detail, so I'm really curious to hear your take on it. But that seemed to have imploded. But to me, as just an observer and not an expert in the space, I can't tell whether the model was faulty, or whether it's just was taken down with the general crypto winter that we're in right now. Let's start with that kind of big trend. Like, where do you see that headed?
I think that when implemented well, the usage of crypto in games, and it may not be every game, but there are certain games, certain experiences that lend themselves better to crypto. And where crypto can be implemented in those experiences, I think it comes to a significant benefit to the player. Whether it's the possibility of using tokens as coordination mechanisms and stakeholder alignments, or very simply at the transactional level. I think that we fail to consider how much play to earn has already been a reality of successful game franchises, except it has happened in the black market or the gray market. So for example, I mentioned earlier that I was super excited for Elden Ring, and Elden Ring is a single player MMO RPG game. And it's very hard. It's very, very hard. And so I watch a lot of YouTube videos to figure out how to beat some bosses. And within about 2 weeks of the game coming out, the branded content that the streamers, the creators were doing before their videos began were targeted, or they were based on black, gray marketplaces where people could sell items or sell runes, because you have an extremely difficult game, super time consuming, and a lot of people, they just want to experience it and they don't want to grind for 100 hours, right? Or maybe they're just wealthy and they just want to have every item in the game because they can, right? But the point being that at that moment, there was a section of players that was earning money in that game and a section of players that was spending money in that game. And that flow of value between cash-rich, time-poor users and cash-poor, time-rich users has existed in games, and we just call it grind, right? But grind has generally existed for a very long time. If you look at mobile free-to-play or free-to-play broadly, about 3% of people there are whales, and then another handful of people, or handful of percentages are dolphins or whatever you call it. But they're net spenders, just not big spenders. And then 90 percentile of that audience is consuming the game for free. And if you went to a game developer and you said, hey, do we want to make a game for all these people who are not going to spend any money in the game? They would say, no, of course not. I would never do that. Nonetheless, the game is made because there's a 10% share there of payers. And so 90% of people get to experience content for free instead of paying. So it's not revenue, but it is a contra expense to the extent that they're consuming revenue for free, which is financed by 10% of people who are wealthy and want to buy lives or want to do whatever it takes, right? And so we have, throughout 20 years of gaming, multiple examples of people making money in digital worlds, except doing it in ways that were either highly unequal and accretive to one single point of one publisher or one studio, or that they were just black market and faulty and people were getting scammed and all the negative things that come from that. So in that sense, I think that crypto comes ultimately to facilitate behaviors that already exist there, which is something that's very unique about crypto gaming, and that outside of crypto gaming, a lot of the crypto implementations are fundamentally trying to change consumer behavior to something that it hasn't been, right? Like another area that I'm very curious about, although we haven't invested in, is music. And a lot of the music implementations, they'll come to you and they'll say, we're going to sell you a record. We're going to sell you this NFT-based audio file, right? And you can listen to it and it's like exclusive. And it's like, I get it. But for the last 20 years, people are going towards not buying music, right? You're going directly against the established pattern of user behavior, which is to stream more, which causes the issue that they're trying to solve, to be fair, right? But it is very much against the behavior of the consumer, versus crypto gaming not being against the behavior of the consumer. And so all of this makes me extremely bullish on it. Now, you look at something like Axie specifically and sort of, what happened there with what we can call Generation 1, V1 crypto games. There was an awesome interview by Ryan Wyatt, who's former head of gaming at YouTube, venture partner at BITKRAFT, and he was at this organization called Machinima back in the day, which was one of the first. They were the prototype of what creator media could be on YouTube. They were an MCN. They had a bunch of awesome creators. That business went nowhere. I mean, it ultimately failed, and put it this way. But several of the people that were there have gone on to become amazing things in the industry. And Ryan said, sometimes when you have a great idea, but you're the first person to go through the brick wall of innovation, you don't make it, right? Like you're going, it's a worthwhile pursuit and you open the path for everyone else, but the first person to go through the brick wall of innovation doesn't make it. And I think a lot about that with the natural experimentation and discovery and difficulties that exist within creating an open world or an open economy game. It's very hard. It's not something that people were doing before. And so when you see people making mistakes, whether it's on tokenomics design, or was the game too simple, were there too many faucets, not enough sinks, all that stuff, right? I think it's important to understand the difficulty of being a first generation innovator and not throwing away the tech with it. And for what it's worth, say whatever you want to say about the V1 Axie game, but the guys, or the team there aggregated a significant audience that they've been able to try to cross-sell other games into. They launched Ronin, their own layer 2, and then they had Katana, the decks, and sort of they transformed that network effect into something that was much, much broader and right, like down to a layer 2 or down to their own blockchain technology, their own index, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, Ronan had an issue a while ago. I think things there are still a little bit volatile. They just reopened the bridge. There's a lot that we'll learn from that side. But nonetheless, like, it was quite impressive, right? That they came from being nowhere, nowhere on the map, to launching a game, to aggregating an audience, to launching a layer 1, to launching a DEX, to pulling a bunch of users into this thing and convincing others to build on their layer 1. So all of that, I think, also points to sometimes the benefits of being the first one to go through the brick wall, and maybe your first product doesn't work that well, but you can make it into something else. And so I think the story is more complicated than just saying like Axie good or bad, or whatever it is. I think that there's a lot of interesting nuance to it.
So it's a space that you're exploring further in your venture activities, right?
We have a token vehicles dedicated exclusively to investing at the intersection of crypto and gaming, and games that include an earning component are definitely a part of it, or token-based games and games that include an earning component.
And what else? Like, what's sort of your thesis, 5, 10, 15 years out? How fast is this space evolving, and what can we look forward to as gamers?
I believe in a world where the most successful game economies behave like digital sovereigns, where significant people are deeply attached to their virtual identity and choose to spend significant amounts of their time in one place, in one ecosystem. And through that, like, whether it's other people that start launching games within those emergent platforms, or whether it's just those platforms using UGC to increase, the content depth, right? So how they partner with third parties, TBD, and I think we'll see different approaches. But I do think that we will have games that evolve from someone being a gaming studio, and they wake up every day and they think about, like, how do I make content today, to really going towards being governments, of asking themselves, how can we increase the velocity of money and transaction flows, and really view ourselves as extracting taxes for providing a digital world and for maintaining a digital world, enforcing security, whatever it may be, instead of just being like a monolithic content seller. And I think that connects to the conversation we had before on sort of the Ready Player One thesis. And that, to me, those worlds, that vision of people are spending more and more time online and fully immersed and like really living digital lives. I think that there will be a select number of places within those digital worlds that will be effectively digital sovereigns. And I think that with this comes cryptocurrencies in a very native sense, right? Like true, like currency, and that's the way of exchanging value within that ecosystem. I think it will come a significant space for assets to be used in different contexts, and really go towards that Ready Player One type vision.
How much, like, you as a gamer, do you play in VR currently, like in percentage of your total time, spent gaming?
Less than 5%.
And what do you think that number will look like in 10 years?
I'm not sure. I think I have not fallen in love with the VR game yet. I'm very excited for the PS2 VR to come out. Everything that I've read, the specs and everything around that looks super cool. They're coming out with a Horizon Zero Dawn franchise for it, or an expansion to the Horizon Zero Dawn franchise into it.
What is that, Horizon Zero Dawn?
It's a open world exploration game, humans versus machines. Kind of feel the machines are organic. They look like animals, but they're actually machines, like a weird cyber, like cyborg nature type take. And it's I think insofar as PG-13 MMOs are concerned, it's probably the best rated game for the last, I don't know, maybe 5 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
So they're doing an expansion into it for the PS2 VR, and it looks beautiful and all of that. And so I'm for sure consumer of it, as it comes out. And I think, the way that I play games is I usually play a handful of games a year. And when I commit to a game, I play a lot of hours in that game. And so the issue from a VR perspective is that I haven't had a VR game that hooked me. But the moment that any VR game hooks me, like if you talk to me 2 years from now, in a post PS2 VR world, and I've liked one of those games, I could answer, 90% of my time is on VR.
Yeah.
Because I don't play on mobile. So for me, it's like, I'm always experiencing at home. And the question is, when will a VR game grab me?
And do you think like that, the gaming platforms of the future, like, will they be owned by big tech? Is there, is there no way around it? Or do you feel like, their kind of current, sentiment that the public has towards, the Meta and Google of this world, like will make it hard for them to continue owning that space of our attention?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's significant effort by Web3 companies to create large scale MMORPGs that can be expanded and use UGC content to allow users more freedom within them, or just like, I don't know, you look at something like a Sandbox, or there's whether it's like a large player like Sandbox, or a number of seed stage Series A companies that sort of are not out in the market yet because they're still building, but there's significant effort around building that vision of what a game can be, or what a Web3 gaming platform can be. And when you look at how those companies are trying to structure governance, there's significant focus on having these decentralized autonomous organizations, the DAOs, be responsible for the game or for the platform, for the tech, and having the governance tokens for said DAOs being owned by players and stakeholders, market participants, whatever it may be. And so I think that if you're a believer in the Web3 thesis, then I think you're likely also a believer, or you believe in a likely chance that a non-current big tech player is going to end up owning a significant share of that space. I think for the same reasons that at the dawn of social gaming, it wasn't like it was Zynga, right? It was like it's usually like disruption comes from the outside, and then everyone catches on, and then eventually you get acquired, and then it's all big tech again. But the broader point being that I think that disruption coming from without is very reasonable, and I think that as the frontier of Web3 is built and expanded, I would expect new entrants to have a significant impact there, and get to disrupt right from the outside of the current scope of big tech.
And tell us about your portfolio. Like, give me maybe like, one game we should all be trying out after this podcast.
Let's see. We've invested in, and I guess I have to give some disclaimer that none of this is investment advice, and just talking about games I think are cool. So one game that we invested in that has had good attention around it is this game called Crypto Unicorns. The full vision of it is today there's a game in the market that's called Zed Run, where people race horses. The Crypto Unicorns is this fun, cheeky take on it. There's more things for people to do with their unicorns. There's a little bit of a farming and a breeding loop. And so it looks like a clash between a Farmville and a racing game, very in theme with the whole unicorn theme and all of that. The art looks cool, the team is cool, and they're releasing more modules. They started launching content a handful of weeks ago, and sort of expanding. And then I think the sort of bigger experiences that we're talking about now are all things that are coming out later this year, because it takes time, right? So we started funding the Web3 studios around this time last year, a little bit before. We raised the fund in April. And we usually, when you're going for the big vision, where you're going for that ideal of what a Web3 game can be, you're generally talking about investing in things that will take 12, 18, 24 or longer to be built. But other situations or other games we've invested in that are super, could be super interesting. Dr. Disrespect is building a first-person shooter called, the studio is called Midnight Studios. There's been a lot of buzz around that one because Doctor is an iconic streamer with a loyal audience, and he's a serious first-person shooter player who also worked in games development before, so he has a cool mix of experience there. I'm personally excited about that one because I'm a big FPS player. There's a game called Ember Sword, which is a Web3 game that has actually been in development for a very long time. It was a team that insisted on that thesis when they were alone in the market, like 3 years ago or something. They've been building for a very long time. They released some alpha footage on Twitter this week, actually. That looked cool, and we're excited about that one. And then there's a bunch of others that are not ready for public consumption yet. We'll just have to wait. There's Cypher is another game that's already out there with some alpha content it's a cool shooter game.
And Elden Ring, you mentioned it a few times, and I actually remember also Elon Musk tweeting about it, that he was a big fan of the game. What is it about Elden Ring that makes it so special? I mean, me as, again, not like a hardcore gamer, like I always wonder, what the hook is for people for an individual game, because I personally, as somebody who doesn't spend a lot of time gaming, for me, like the aesthetics are always pretty important. Like, this kind of wow factor of like, wow, amazing graphics and, super kind of photorealistic. But then, when you look at like the successes, like that doesn't seem to be necessarily the most important criteria for the average gamer, right? Like what is it typically? Like what are some of the kind of criteria that make a mainstream successful game?
Elden Ring certainly has stunning graphics. It's a beautiful game. It's gigantic. I've played a lot of games, and this was one where I'm like, whoa, this map is huge. And then it was like a map expansion, and I was like, wow, this expansion is big. And then that happened over and over and over, like 10 times. You go underground, there's another map, huge map, sort of like underneath the main city. It's a very large game. Where the wealth of detail and attention the developer paid to that entire world versus the size of it is absolutely incredible. There's something very unique about what we call a Souls type game. So From Software, the publisher or the studio that makes Elden Ring, is famous for Souls type game from Dark Souls, which is one of their successful titles. And these games tend to be extremely difficult. It takes dozens of tries, sometimes 100 tries for you to beat a boss. You have to memorize a movement pattern in a very precise way. It's a lot of rolling, and they're hard. They're fair though. You tend to, sometimes you feel like, oh man, like that was random, that sucked. But a lot of times you're like, I just got to get better. Like there's a meme within the community, which is get good, because people would come to Reddit and be like, oh, I don't know how to beat this boss. And then someone would just comment below, just get good. And what that makes is when you beat a boss, when you beat an enemy, when you finish a Souls type game, the feeling is extremely unique. It's a very powerful feeling. You feel like you truly accomplish something through that experience. That sacrifice and the grind that it requires is a special feeling. It's something that always brings me back to their games, because I know it's going to be torture, but I know that when I beat it, it's going to feel so good. In many ways, it's the similar feeling that I get when playing something like Warzone, right? When you're the last person of the 150 that live, like there's an emotion to that experience that is very special. So Elden Ring also has fantastic lore. The baseline of the lore was done by George R. R. Martin from Game of Thrones. Hideo Miyazaki from Software is a master at all of this and has done a lot of amazing lore before George R. R. Martin as well. And so it's the combination of lore, of exploration, of big worlds that look beautiful, of a complex move set, class set, weapon set, armor set that provides depth in the play experience. And you can play it in a bunch of different ways, and a challenge that feels fair, but ultimately highly rewarding for you to to accomplish.
Okay, I mean, you definitely sold it to me, man. I mean, I'm a FIFA guy. You know, I always like the sports games, but probably just not patient enough for these type of adventures. But
Have you ever played Formula One?
yes,
Okay, so have you ever played the Monaco track on Formula One?
oh yeah,
You know how
I
it's like impossible, and
of
then when you
course,
finally beat the Monaco track, it feels amazing.
yep,
That's what a Souls game feels like.
yeah,
It's that. It's the Monaco track on Formula One, except
yeah.
in an open world MMO setting. But it's that feeling. It requires
Mhm.
that level of grind and precision and knowledge and going through that experience.
It is incredible. Like I actually started playing it on the plane not too long ago, also on mobile, like the F1 mobile game, and it is really just like mind blowing how much more difficult that track is to every other track. And then when you had the Monaco race the other day, you know, watching the replay was just so interesting because it just so perfectly resembles, you know, the game, or the game rather resembles the actual track.
I mean,
Um,
I know that it's a hard sport because I see how hard the athletes train, right? I get
yeah,
it. But I honestly respected the athletes more after playing the track. Like after
yeah,
playing the game, I was like, man, like this is really hard. It's like it took me, you know, even it's like highly artificial and whatever, but it took me
yeah,
trying to do that track versus any other track and really feeling the margin of error. And I had seen videos of track footage, right, of people this close to a
yeah.
wall, and sort of intuitively I got it, but feeling it, it was quite
And
something.
they play it, right? I mean, you see that in the Netflix show,
Yeah.
right? They play the game also to prepare. Um, Rosberg actually on his YouTube channel. I don't know if you know this, but he plays the game before every race, and then he talks about like what the drivers are thinking in each curve, and you know, like where to brake, and you know, all these points. It's actually pretty nice. Um, well, Carlos, thanks so much for sharing this, giving us you know, some more insights into this industry, and yeah, would love to chat with you again in some time and see where we're at, and see, you know, how much VR has entered your life.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.